I really mean it. Like things like Dr. Heiser influenced me on that made a lot of sense, that changed my views, were things like how to think about inspiration, which played a very meaningful impact in my life regarding my return to the faith many years ago when he first started getting popular. I mean, it was a little ways into it, I could say, but things I had questions about. So how inspiration is the defendable way of what the Bible, how to defend inspiration, and then his work just is in general, the unseen realm, and my interest in the same sort of weird stuff that he likes. And so he earned my respect very quickly, and the way he handled it and responded to my correspondence early on before he got really popular. So I followed him and listened to most of his podcasts whenever I could find them, and read his blog posts and stuff like that. And I read a couple of the books, The Unseen Realm, and I read the fictional one. This is the one I read. It's been a while. Sorry, I bought it online and read it. But I wanted to mention something I disagree with. One of the things I disagreed with him on thoroughly, and I've mentioned this before. It was one of the first videos I ever made many years ago that I posted on, because people were challenging me on my view of the intermediate state, and that is, I agree with his view of the unseen realm and the supernatural sort of way the Bible's written. I just don't believe actual human spirits continue after death, in the sense that they're spirits that can be, I think that death is an unconscious state awaiting the resurrection and judgment at the end of the world by Jesus. I think that the Old Testament is quite clear that the Hebrews were teaching what was true and the rest of the nations were not. So as much as it's good to bring in the ancient Near East context, I always thought Heiser took it a little too far when he argued something like, well, everybody around them believed that. Yeah, but they were also separate from the nations and had the real God of creation leading them. I always thought that was maybe him being a little too much into his historic critical method there, which it's a conundrum, right? Because it seems like you're in denial if you don't incorporate ancient Near East context and polemics, in some cases at least being possible, and they are certain, in fact. But that doesn't mean we should go so far as to say, if we're believers anyways, that can inform what the Bible is necessarily saying. No. Most textual scholars show that the ancient Hebrews knew nothing nor promoted any idea, and at best they were unsure. So you're going to tell me that the ancient Hebrews, for some reason, were unsure about the nature of life after death, before the cross, if you're a believer, but the rest of the nations had it down pat. That you were conscious and you went to another place, and they wrote all about that, in Egypt and all that stuff. And they contacted their dead relatives, which God forbid, by the way. So now reevaluate that question. I'm gonna say God kept them from believing such things because they're not true, and it's a way to be deceived. And that's why God forbids something that you can't actually do when he says contacting the dead. Now it depends on how you define dead there. But if you define it as are people who have died dead and can therefore can be contacted since God forbids it? Or is he saying don't try to do things like what the other nations do, like contact dead relatives? First of all, they're not alive because they're dead. And second, if you do that practice like the other nations, you're bringing upon yourself demonic activity that's actually telling you a lie. Like what in my word says, the dead don't know anything, neither have they any more reward. You can't contact them. So I always found it curious that Heiser would argue that way. The Bible forbid it. Well, it's not possible. Yeah, but you think it's possible, and you get deceived by the other gods. That's the problem. Anyway, It's the same sort of thing, right? It's kind of like and the same thing. Dr. Falk and Heiser kind of argue this too. The text says it was Samuel. No, the text says he perceived that it was Samuel, meaning it's ambiguous. They thought it was Samuel from the first person sort of narrative point of view. Saul thought that. So it's a weird sort of like forcing, the Bible says, so I just disagree with him there, but I really loved his work and miss him dearly. It's okay to have disagreements. I listened to his arguments. And like, let me say again, obviously forbidding talking to the dead, here's my point about that, about Heiser's argument. My point is, let me just air it all out. Here's my final kind of criticism that I had of him where I disagreed. But I heard him out because I actually like the person and I appreciate what I learned from him. But just to get it out on the table. So I'll tie in my last thing that I had as a disagreement with him, just so it's known to people, because I don't want to mislead people into thinking I accept all of his work or that I agree with him on everything. I want to show that I love his work and appreciate his work and benefited from his work, and that these are my disagreements, for clarity. So arguing the text says it was Samuel just seems like a weird argument, because the thing about, and here's the last issue I always took with Heiser, the way he defended the use of the text regarding the idea that you can have an old earth, a flood in an old earth that's not worldwide. Look, I'm not really although I'm probably too nice about it. I think young earth creationism is right, but I don't think you have to believe it to follow Jesus, just like you don't have to do any particular thing in general. But I'm talking about the language. Hills can mean, Eretz can mean just earth in general. No, it's talking about the 2 Peter gives us the interpretation. That world which God created is that same world that God flooded, which was a universal judgment, which he then ties to the second coming of Jesus, who will judge all humanity, the living and the dead, of not only presently, but of all time, to tidy up the ages and restore God's creation. We believe God created the universe, and that Jesus is going to be the judge of the entire earth, space and time, of all humans, not just the Middle East or whatever Moses thought the world was when he wrote it. Okay, doesn't matter in that case. It doesn't matter what Moses thought, unless you think God just created that which Moses was aware of. See, this is where context can bite you in that sort of sense, right? I recognize that we need to take into account the author's use of language, but there's sometimes when you say the world. Well, the known world to him, I don't deny that it's a limited scope, or he didn't know it was a globe. That's fine. But Peter refers it back to that which, that's Genesis, right? It's real close to the creation story. Do you think he only created that which Moses was aware of? No. What God created is that which God flooded, and is that which is going to be judged at Jesus' return in fire. That's everything. So, but in Heiser, I felt like he was so willing to bend over backwards to not dismiss anybody or take sides, okay, on that issue, which seems so not like a strong. It seems to me that how he would bend over backwards, being a textual guy too, right? That he would make room for them and say it's ambiguous in a certain sense. But then turn around with the issue about the state of the dead. He wouldn't give the same sort of courtesy to those of us who believe in an unconscious intermediate state, which is way stronger textually as an option than, like, say, a flood that wasn't universal or worldwide, right? In my opinion, anyway, it seems to me the sort of arguments that let's put it this way. Like what the church has understood, that it was just the whole world, whatever that is, okay? And that it's universal, that is to say everything. There wasn't some people that, well, maybe they were good and so got, no, it's saying everybody was judged, the whole world, that which God created. So the damage, but it's like, I'm not saying that's wrong, that it's not possible, like some way possible that you could see it that way or something, maybe, without lying about the text. But if that's true, but he would never give that same leeway to people who believed that you're not conscious in the intermediate state. And I always thought that was weird. Okay? I think, so I saw his bias there. I was like, okay, I get it. You don't agree, but give that view the same sort of like, well, some people say this, and you can interpret it that way because of, after all, it says the dead don't know anything. It's forbidden. Dead people, they need to be resurrected, and all the texts in the Old Testament that make most of scholarship realize that the Hebrew Bible doesn't actually teach a dualist. Maybe they'll say it kind of maybe hints at some sort of existence in fog and shadow of the dark or something in the intermediate state, kinda, but you could take it metaphorically. But most people understand that the Hebrews had no concept. This is totally development into the Hellenistic period and then into the New Testament and the way people interpreted it and have wrote about it in the early church. I deny all that. I think the Greek philosophers and a lot of the early church fathers who were steeped in that adopted that view, and it's evident in their writings, and particularly Augustine too, and that many of them are misread today because of that sort of stain into thinking of Christian writers and scholars over the centuries. And so people even read it even more deeply into what people are saying in the early church, which isn't necessarily the case. But because some strong writers argued it, strongly, it gets implanted into the text in ways that were never a part of the concept in the Hebrew mind. And the way and then translation bias and word usage, like the word soul, and how people understood it. Generally, the unwashed masses in their ignorance sort of conceived of it in their minds, and now it just is assumed, and that's why the new translations tend not to use that term, soul, because it just causes confusion. I mean, my tradition read it in the King James, read hell in the King James, still came to the right conclusion in my mind somehow. And people love to say Adventists didn't even know the original languages. Well, they sure corrected a lot of the same errors you're holding, like the nature of hell and the idea about the soul and what it actually says in the original language. So I guess that's proof that they were inspired, because they were able to untangle that mess even with the King James, didn't they? But guess what? Adventists have scholars now, and they're very good, unbiased scholars in most cases, because you have to be to actually contribute to the greater community of scholarship. If you're biased in that sort of way, you'll never get published. You'll never produce anything anybody will read, and you want to... Anyway.